lots of data flowing in and coming together to helps us democratize the way we measure our environment and to give the people the possibility to measure themselves and actually see what's happening and also discuss new strategies together. But let us see this video and then we will start with some more data and a few rankings. So I guess that's worth an applause for the first numbers we see. We will quickly go through how we kind of calculated the numbers and what does that mean in terms of rankings. So first of all, we would like to go back a little bit about and talk about the initial discussions we had. We said we want people living in different cities around the world to individually measure and contribute things, especially in the disciplines of mobility and energy, but also with respect to food waste, anti-food waste, and things like flight compensations and many more. It was quite difficult for all disciplines to implement this goal to have people measuring things directly. So we were relying on some partners, especially for the first edition of the Climate City Cup. And in the end, we could not have enough data points in all disciplines to create rankings out of it, but we will go through each of the disciplines quickly and see where we could create rankings and what they're based on. The initial idea was also to kind of calculate deltas, so what's the difference between the first months of the Climate City Cup and the following months, so we could see whether there is a change. And you saw with the mobility rankings that we had here, there was a change actually as compared to the first months. In almost all cities there was a higher share of commuting tracks that were reported that were actually sustainable. But what does that mean? Let's maybe quickly go through the different disciplines and the data points we have. So first of all, energy. Here we got the data set from EWZ, that's the public energy provider in Zurich, with 11,523 data points. So what they gave us is like for the whole period of the Climate City Cup, every 15 minutes they were looking at how much energy was consumed on a city level. It's electricity, sorry, not energy in total, but electricity. And we had more than 20 contributions from individuals who actually took the job to go down in their basements, in their cellars, and kind of read their meters once in a while and just support us with having individualized measurements. Nevertheless, as we only have data from one city in this discipline, which is Zurich, we cannot kind of create a ranking out of it. But we would anyway like to show you how the energy consumption in Zurich has evolved over the period of the Climate City Cup. So as you can see here, this is the weekly consumption. We kind of built an average, and usually it's around somewhere like 52 million kilowatt hours, which is like 52,000 megawatt hours for Zurich. And you see there is some peaks and some drops. Clearly, this has nothing to do with the Climate City Cup because you're just not big enough to change things there. So this is just like natural fluctuations in the use of energy. So we have here in July, when we have like a very low consumption, this is usually the time where people are on summer holidays, right? So we actually need less energy in the city, people don't go to work, and we see then it's going up towards the end of the year, towards November. This is clearly because it's getting colder, so people have to are using more electricity in that time. When you look at this data in a more granular way, you see that there is even fluctuation within a week. So usually on the weekends, energy consumption drops quite dramatically. That means that it's clear that the highest part of the consumption actually comes from anywhere from industry and less from households. So it makes a big difference. If people are working, we just use more electricity, right? So for us, these are all interesting things to see, and also for the way forward in the future. And this helps us tremendously to see like who should we get on board. The goal or the idea for the future is that we work with a lot of employers in the different cities. For example, also the public employers like the city itself and others that run different activities during the Climate City Cup. And we try to just slightly influence the data that we can show afterwards. So if imagine one day everybody in Zurich is telling the people that in the offices, whenever you leave your office, you cannot turn off the light. Whenever you don't use your laptop, close it. Whenever you don't use your screen, just really tear it out, plug it out or whatever. So that we want to see how can we in the end have an effect on this data here. And then in the future, clearly the goal is also to have more direct measurements coming from smart meters, for example, or new tools that we have to measure energy consumption. Next discipline was flight compensations. Here we worked with our partner MyClimate. We tried to motivate as many people as we could to compensate their flights during the Climate City Cup, but surely also after the Climate City Cup. And during the Climate City Cup time, we had 8,236 flights compensated, either departing or arriving at one of these 5 larger airports that were official Climate City Cup cities. Like this, more than 17,500 tons of CO2 were compensated. Also, disclaimer clearly here, this is not all because of the Climate City Cup. This is all of the flights that in this time period have been compensated. We don't have a measure that clearly tells us which of these flights are because of the Climate City Cup and which not. If we see that we have like something like 150 official participants, but probably a bit of a wider reach anyway, we would say this would probably a rather small percentage. But interestingly enough, My Climate told me at the beginning that they hardly had, for example, any business in India up to that point before we started the Climate City Cup. And now during the Climate City Cup, we at least have a total of almost 100 flights from and to Bangalore and Delhi that were compensated over this period of time. So I think that's a great success. We see clearly the highest share of compensation comes from Zurich and Geneva, but this has also to do with the fact that My Climate is here in Zurich, and that Swiss, the airline, for example, they have integrated this compensation scheme of My Climate directly into the booking process by now. We're talking about emissions and measuring air quality. We had the goal to create an open hardware design for these tools or these boxes that help us measure air quality. It took some time to develop them. We probably underestimated that a bit in the beginning. We had a very great first prototype that was produced by Emmanuel and Loguer, which we used in Marseille in our summer retreat to actually measure air quality while we were biking in the gangs and while we were walking around in the city. And Manuel created these maps of air quality thank you, dear. So they look like this. Those are the initial versions of the air quality measurement sensors that we have. You can find them on the table there in the exhibition. We have not kind of provided those to the participants because we said we want to actually professionalize the design of these, and we want to kind of create an open hardware license. And we worked then with Muktani, who will speak a bit later just about the design of these devices. And they're almost ready to be shipped to participants for future editions of the Climate City Cup. Then we were having the discipline of circularity and food waste management. I think it's kind of difficult to see that, but we were working with a network called Partage. Maybe you want to say a few things about this.
Yes, so Partage, in fact, it's a food bank in Geneva. What they do, they collaborate with different shops, huge shops like Manor, Globus, Migros, Coop, and they collect food that wasn't sold out, and then they distribute it. So here we can see we have the data in French, but the amount of food that was collected through different months in 2018 and then compared to 2019, and then the amount of food that is distributed. What surprised us a lot is that in average they told us that they collect around 3 tons of food per day, which is incredible if we think about how much food we waste actually. And on the other side, there's still some actions taken by those corporations, so they produce biogas, but otherwise most of the food goes directly to the bin. So food waste was a little bit more complicated discipline, because what we wanted initially is to really provide people with a tool to measure their food waste daily in their houses, which is a very challenging goal that we set at the beginning. However, we decided to talk to different organizations who work with the food waste issues, and that's actually the only data we had, because of this difficulty to assess actually the amount of food that is wasted or that can be reintegrated in the cycle.
Thank you. So also there is still a lot to do for a future version of Climate City Cup. It's kind of important for us to talk about how we can make these things more efficient for the next version, and we'll have some time to do that afterwards. Here, just very quickly, this is more or less how the Excel of mobility and commuting looked. I kind of manually ran through the data entries, and it took me a few hours to calculate all the things because the Excel was quite messy, I would say. But we anyway managed to kind of bring some order into it. We tried to distinguish what we called sustainable transportation from non-sustainable transportation. So we took walking and biking and where it says bus, which includes all forms of public transportation as sustainable modes of transport, and motorcycle, car, ferry would be like the unsustainable ones. We had different time frames again here, so the yellow ones, for example, was the initial reference month, and blue was the later part. So this resulted in this table where I kind of compared the share of sustainable transportation in the first months of the Climate City Cup to the share of sustainable transportation in the rest of the months. We see also that some cities have reported more than 3,000 kilometers during this phase. This leads us to some rankings. So for average transportation sustainability at the end of the Climate City Cup, we have Zurich as a winner with more than 99% of the trips that were reported actually being sustainable. Then second Geneva with 93.8% and third Bonn with 83.4%. For the total kilometers reported, we have Bonn, who reported the most kilometers. It was more than 3,300 as mentioned, then closely followed by Maribor, and third place was Geneva, a little bit less Zurich and Lille. This leads us to the first rankings of the Climate City Cup, of the first edition 2019. So for the flight compensation ranking, we have in third place the participants from Bonn. In the second place, we have the participants in Geneva. And first place, we have the participants in Zurich.
Given that we are running a little bit out of time, maybe we can distribute the certificates during the break and we can continue with the rankings, otherwise it will take a little bit too long than expected.
Okay, and for the mobility disciplines, the first ranking of the Climate City Cup 2019, third place, we had participants in Zurich. For the second place coming in, we had again Geneva. And this time, winners are in Bonn.